Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Defiance, watching the holographic display show 3 massive alien vessels approaching Earth's outer defense perimeter. The morning had started like any other day in the Sol system, but now everything was different. As the sleek silver ships moved through space like predators hunting prey, Lieutenant Lisa Grant looked up from her communication station with worry in her eyes as she monitored the incoming signals from the unknown vessels that had appeared without warning just hours before. The alien ships were unlike anything in Earth's database, with their flowing organic curves and strange energy signatures that made the sensors buzz with confusion and fear. Jake had been commanding the Defiance for 3 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment when humanity would face its first real contact with a hostile alien civilization. The main screen flickered as an incoming transmission broke through. Their communication arrays and the bridge crew fell silent, waiting to see what would appear before them. A tall insectoid creature materialized on the screen with multiple arms that moved like deadly weapons and compound eyes that glowed with cold intelligence and unmistakable arrogance. This was High Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire, and his presence filled the bridge with an aura of menace that made even the most experienced crew members shift uncomfortably in their seats. His voice buzzed through the universal translator, with a sound like metal scraping against stone as he delivered his message to the humans who dared to exist in his path. "Primitive humans," he said with contempt, dripping from every word, "you will surrender. Your homeworld within 1 solar rotation or face complete annihilation. That will leave nothing but ashen memories. Your species has been marked for subjugation by the Zephyrian Empire, and resistance will only bring you greater suffering before your inevitable defeat." Jake stepped forward, feeling the weight of responsibility for all humanity resting on his shoulders as he faced this alien threat that had appeared from the depths of space. His jaw set with determination that had been passed down through generations of warriors who had never known surrender, even in the face of impossible odds. "This is Commander Morrison of Earth Defense," he said with a voice that carried the authority of his position and the strength of his species. "You are trespassing in human space, and I advise you to turn around now and leave our system before this situation escalates beyond your ability to control. Turn around now and no one gets hurt," he added with the kind of quiet confidence that had made humans dangerous throughout their bloody history. The alien's mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter if insects could truly understand humor. But the sound was cold and filled with mockery. "Foolish mammals," Vextar replied with amusement that was as sharp as broken glass. "You clearly do not understand your position in this galaxy, or the power that stands before you. Do you not know that even the Galactic Council issued warnings about your kind and what you might become, if left unchecked to spread through the stars even? They fear what darkness might emerge from your violent little world, but we Zephyrians have conquered 17 star systems, and we fear nothing that walks or crawls or flies. Your reputation for savagery precedes you, but savagery means nothing against superior technology and overwhelming force that can crush worlds beneath its weight." Meanwhile, in the depths of space on the trading station, Nexus Prime, an old Velthari merchant named Kethson, shook his head sadly as he monitored the communications between the two species. He was ancient even by his people's standards, and he remembered the warnings that had been passed down through generations of spacefaring civilizations like sacred texts that must never be forgotten. The warnings were simple but absolute, and every wise species had learned to heed them or face consequences that would haunt them across the centuries. Never corner a human, for they do not know how to surrender, and will fight until their last breath leaves their bodies. Never threaten their young, for they will become creatures of pure vengeance that will hunt you across the galaxy without rest or mercy. Never attack their home, for they are the children of death worlds, and when their nest is threatened, they become something far worse than monsters. They are survivors of the galaxy's most violent nursery, where gravity crushes bones and weather kills the unwary, and predators hunt in coordinated packs. Most species evolved on garden worlds with gentle rains and abundant food, and peaceful creatures that knew nothing of true struggle. But Earth was different, and it had forged its children in fires that would destroy any other race and taught them lessons that no other species could understand. Captain Amy Rodriguez, commanding the patrol ship Guardian, received Jake's emergency transmission as she conducted routine exercises near the asteroid belt. Amy Jake's voice came through the comm system with urgency that cut through the normal chatter of space operations. They are not backing down and their weapons are powering up, which means we are about to face our first interstellar war. All human ships. This is Captain Rodriguez, she broadcast. On all frequencies as her crew snapped to attention at their battle stations, Code Red activation is now in effect, and all vessels are to protect Earth at all costs using any means necessary. The Guardian changed course immediately as Amy felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had carried her through countless battles in the outer colonies. She had fought pirates and raiders and corporate mercenaries, but this was different, because this time they were facing an enemy that threatened not just human interests but humanity's very survival. Other ships throughout the system received similar orders as the Earth Defense Network activated protocols that had been prepared for decades but never used. The orbital platforms powered their weapons, while ground installations brought their defensive systems online in a coordinated response that surprised even the humans with its efficiency. But the Zephyrians had made their choice, and they had ignored every warning that the universe had whispered about humanity across the long years. High Admiral Vextar watched the human preparations with amusement, believing that their primitive technology could never match the might of the Zephyrian Empire. His ships moved into attack formation as he prepared to deliver a lesson that would echo throughout the galaxy about the folly of resistance. The first energy blast lit up the darkness between the fleets as the Zephyrians opened fire with weapons that could crack planets and boil oceans. But something was different about the human response as their ships moved with a coordination that seemed impossible for such a young civilization. Jake Morrison gripped the command chair as the Defiance shook under enemy fire, but his eyes burned with something that Vextar did not recognize. It was the look of a predator that had been awakened from sleep and was ready to show the galaxy why Earth's children had earned their fearsome reputation. The universe had tried to warn them, but the Zephyrians had chosen to ignore those warnings, and now they would learn why that had been a terrible mistake. The first Zephyrian attack came at dawn over the Pacific Ocean, when their energy weapons carved through Earth's atmosphere like burning swords falling from heaven. The beams struck major cities with precision that spoke of careful planning as buildings crumbled and people screamed in languages that the aliens would never understand. Sydney's harbor glowed with unnatural fire, while Tokyo's towers collapsed into dust, and New York's skyline disappeared behind walls of flame that reached toward the morning sky. But what the Zephyrians did not expect was how quickly humanity would respond to this attack on their home world, and everything they held sacred. Within the first hour, every human military installation on Earth was fully active as soldiers, who had been sleeping peacefully, suddenly found themselves preparing for war. Colonel Ben Parker stood in the command center beneath Colorado watching screens that showed destruction across 3 continents while his fingers moved across control panels with deadly efficiency. His voice cut through the chaos as he coordinated ground defenses that had been designed for this exact moment, even though no one had truly believed it would ever come. Major Kate Sullivan launched the orbital defense platforms from her station high above the planet where she could see the alien ships moving like silver death through the black void of space. The global defense network had been dormant for decades of peace, but now it roared to life with power that surprised even its creators. Weapons that had been theoretical suddenly became real as human engineering proved itself capable of matching alien technology through pure determination and innovative thinking. They hit Sydney and Tokyo and New York, reported Sergeant Danny Lee from his position in the underground bunker, where communications flowed like blood through the veins of a giant creature. Casualties are in the millions. He continued with a voice that remained steady despite the horror of what he was reporting to his superiors. Jake Morrison felt something change inside him as he heard those numbers and saw the images of destruction that filled every screen around the bridge of his ship. His face hardened with an expression that had not been seen on Earth for generations but was still written in human DNA like an ancient memory, waiting to be awakened. Something primal stirred in his eyes that had been sleeping since humanity's last great war, but was now rising like a tide that could not be stopped. Then we show them why the galaxy fears us, he said with quiet certainty that made every crew member on the bridge feel the weight of their species' violent history. Dr. Helen Wright had spent her career studying alien species and their homeworlds, but now her knowledge became a weapon as deadly as any gun or missile. She understood what other species whispered about humans in the dark corners of space stations where traders gathered to share stories and warnings. "Jake, you need to understand something," she said as her fingers brought up displays showing the homeworlds of every known galactic civilization. Every other species in the galaxy evolved on garden worlds with gentle weather and abundant resources where survival was a matter of finding food rather than fighting for life. Earth is different because Earth is a death world, where gravity crushes the weak and weather kills the unprepared and predators hunt in coordinated packs. We are not just another species in the galaxy, Jake, because we are survivors of the most violent nursery that any world has ever produced. Our ancestors faced ice ages that lasted thousands of years, and predators that could kill with a single bite, and natural disasters that wiped out entire continents. We learned to hunt in groups and use tools and adapt to any environment, because those who could not do these things simply died and left no children. The Zephyrians pressed their attack with confidence that came from conquering 17 other star systems without facing any real resistance from the species they had defeated. But they had never faced an enemy like humanity before, and they did not understand what they had awakened with their unprovoked assault on Earth. Lieutenant Commander Rick Stone led the first human counterattack as his squadron of fighters moved through space with precision that came from generations of warfare. "Remember, these bugs think they are apex predators," he told his pilots as they approached the alien fleet that hung in space like a collection of deadly jewels. Time to show them what real predators look like when they are protecting their home and their families from those who would destroy everything they love. His fighters moved like wolves hunting prey as they used tactics that no other species had ever developed, because no other species had needed to perfect the art of group hunting. They struck fast and hard, and then disappeared into the black void before the aliens could respond with their superior weapons and technology. As the battle raged, something ancient stirred in every human heart that heard news of the attack on their world. It was the same instinct that had driven their ancestors to hunt mammoth across frozen plains and cross vast oceans in search of new lands to claim. The same instinct that had taught them never to surrender even when facing impossible odds, because surrender meant death, and death was not acceptable. Captain Tony Blake proved this when his cruiser took critical damage from Zephyrian weapons that tore through his ship's hull. Like paper, instead of retreating, he turned his damaged vessel toward the largest enemy ship and activated his engines for a ramming attack that would cost him his life. His final transmission echoed across the human fleet as he drove his ship into the side of a Zephyrian dreadnought that exploded in a ball of fire. "For Earth," he said, with his dying breath as metal screamed, and fusion reactors overloaded in a chain reaction that lit up space like a new star for humanity. He continued as his sacrifice proved to every watching alien that humans would rather die than accept defeat. "Let them burn." He finished as the explosion consumed both ships and sent a message that no translation was needed to understand. The Zephyrians began to realize that they were not fighting a normal species, as human ships continued their attacks even when outnumbered and outgunned. These creatures did not follow the normal rules of warfare that dictated retreat when victory became impossible. Instead, they seemed to grow more dangerous, as the battle continued like a fire that fed on itself and burned brighter with each passing moment. High Admiral Vextar watched his tactical displays with growing confusion, as human vessels used strategies that made no logical sense according to everything he knew about combat. They sacrificed themselves to destroy larger ships and coordinated attacks. That should have been impossible for such a primitive civilization. His science officer reported energy signatures that defied understanding as human weapons adapted to Zephyrian defenses in real time. These mammals were not behaving like any species the Zephyrians had encountered in their conquest of the local star cluster. They were acting like something far more dangerous than simple warriors fighting for territory or resources. They were acting like parents, protecting their children from predators that threatened their nest. The Zephyrian High Admiral Vexitar stood before his command display watching fleet reports that filled him with growing unease as his forces encountered resistance unlike anything in his military experience. The humans were not fighting like any species he had encountered during his long career of conquest across 17 star systems that had fallen before Zephyrian might. They did not retreat when outnumbered by superior forces, and they did not negotiate when facing weapons that could crack planets and boil away entire oceans. Instead, they adapted their tactics in real time as if each battle taught them new ways to kill their enemies more efficiently. Sir, his tactical officer buzzed nervously while monitoring the data streams that showed human fleet movements across the Sol system. The human ships are using suicide runs against our dreadnoughts, and they are ramming our vessels with their damaged cruisers instead of attempting to withdraw to safety. Impossible, Vextar replied with mandibles clicking in disbelief, because no rational species would sacrifice themselves so readily when retreat remained an option. But Captain Tony Blake had already proved him wrong by driving his burning cruiser into the side of a Zephyrian capital ship that exploded like a dying star. His sacrifice inspired other human commanders who began using their ships as weapons when conventional attacks failed to penetrate alien defenses. The tide of battle began to turn when Colonel E. Sarah Davis led the first boarding action against a Zephyrian vessel that had been crippled by human fighter attacks. Human Marines moved through the alien corridors like shadows of death, bringing terror to creatures who had never faced an enemy. On their own ships, these soldiers were products of a heavy-gravity world where every step required strength that would crush the bones of most galactic species. Their muscles had been forged under Earth's crushing weight, making them unstoppable forces when they entered the lighter environments of alien vessels. The Zephyrians discovered that their elegant ship designs became death traps when filled with human warriors who knew how to fight in confined spaces. These humans, a surviving Zephyrian soldier whispered to his commander after escaping the boarding action, that had cost them an entire deck of their ship. They do not just fight like normal soldiers defending territory or resources because they hunt like predators who enjoy the chase and the kill. They move through our ships like pack hunters who have been tracking prey across vast distances and will not stop until their quarry is dead. Admiral Nina Carter commanded the main human battle fleet from her flagship where she coordinated humanity's response with cold efficiency that impressed even her enemies. She had studied every great military leader in human history, from Alexander, who conquered the known world, to Napoleon, who rewrote the rules of warfare. Now she applied their lessons to interstellar combat, using strategies that had been perfected in countless wars across Earth's bloody history. Her tactical displays showed human forces advancing on all fronts, as ships that had been scattered across the system converged on Zephyrian positions. The aliens had expected quick surrender from a species they considered primitive, but instead found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger with each passing hour. Humans across the galaxy, who had been working as merchants and diplomats and explorers, suddenly revealed themselves as a coordinated intelligence network that spanned dozens of star systems. Private First Class Joe Murphy was stationed on a mining colony 3 systems away when he received coded transmissions that activated sleeper protocols buried in his memory. He hijacked a Zephyrian supply convoy using explosives that had been hidden in the asteroid mines for years while waiting for a signal that finally came. Message to Earth Command, he transmitted, as alien ships burned around him like torches in the void package delivered. And the bugs are running scared out here because they never expected us to have assets this far from home. Dr. Alan Foster worked on a research station in neutral space where he had been studying alien technology for the past 5 years under academic cover. When the war began, he turned his laboratory into a weapons factory, using knowledge he had gathered about Zephyrian shield frequencies and hull compositions. If they want a war, he said, while his improvised weapons rolled off production lines that had been designed for scientific instruments, we will give them one they will never forget, because we have been preparing for this day longer than they could possibly imagine. The Zephyrians began to realize that their intelligence about humanity had been completely wrong, as human forces appeared in systems they had never known contained any Earth presence. These mammals had been seeding the galaxy for decades, with hidden bases and weapon caches and allies that remained secret until the moment of activation. Every trading post and research station and diplomatic mission had been part of a vast network that now revealed its true purpose. Lieutenant Kelly Brown emerged from her cover as a cultural attaché on a Zephyrian border world, where she had been gathering intelligence for 3 years. She activated human agents who had been living normal lives while waiting for orders that would transform them into saboteurs and guerrilla fighters. Zephyrian supply lines began to collapse as convoys disappeared and fuel depots exploded, and communication relays went silent across their territory. The aliens found themselves fighting not just the human fleet near Earth, but an entire shadow army that had been growing like cancer throughout their empire. Corporal Chris White revealed himself on a Zephyrian industrial world, where he had been working as a maintenance technician in their primary shipyard, had spent months mapping every critical system and identifying weak points that could cripple production when the time came for action. His sabotage destroyed half the Zephyrian fleet before it could be deployed, while secondary explosions turned their greatest shipyard into twisted metal and flame. Major Steve Garcia commanded human special forces that emerged from hiding places throughout Zephyrian space like wolves emerging from winter dens. They struck at command centers and communication hubs and fuel refineries with precision that spoke of years of careful planning and preparation. The Zephyrian Empire discovered that they were not fighting a single planet, but a distributed organism that had tendrils reaching throughout the galaxy. Every human civilian had been a potential soldier waiting for activation, and every human business had been a front for military intelligence gathering. High Admiral Vextar received reports that his forces were in full retreat on 17 different fronts as human attacks intensified across all occupied territories. How is this possible? He demanded of his science officer, who trembled before delivering news that shattered everything the Zephyrians thought they knew. Sir, our intelligence was completely wrong about this species and their true capabilities. Humans have been seeding the galaxy for decades with sleeper agents and hidden weapons and alliances that we never suspected existed. They were never a single system species, but a distributed civilization that only appeared primitive because they wanted us to underestimate their true strength. The warnings we ignored were not empty threats, but accurate assessments of what would happen if we provoked a species that had been preparing for this war longer than our empire has existed. The galaxy had tried to tell them, but the Zephyrians had chosen to learn the hard way why you should never provoke humanity. Within 72 hours, the balance of power had shifted completely, as the Zephyrian Empire found itself retreating on all fronts from an enemy they had foolishly underestimated. High Admiral Vextar received reports that chilled his alien blood, as human forces swept through Zephyrian space like a plague that consumed everything in its path. The empire that had conquered 17 star systems in the past century now found their worlds falling one by one to creatures they had dismissed as primitive mammals. How is this possible? He demanded of his trembling science officer while watching tactical displays that showed nothing but defeat and destruction. They were supposed to be a single system species confined to one small world. At the edge of galactic civilization, Sir, our intelligence was catastrophically wrong about the true nature of human expansion. Throughout this sector of space, humans have been seeding the galaxy for decades with hidden colonies and weapon caches, and sleeper agents who waited for activation signals. They have allies we never suspected, including species that have been feeding them information about our military capabilities and strategic weaknesses. Commander Jake Morrison led the final assault on the Zephyrian command ship as human boarding parties prepared to deliver justice for the attack on Earth. His team moved through the corridors of the alien vessel with practiced efficiency that spoke of countless hours training for exactly this type of combat. Each human warrior was a product of evolution on a death world, where only the strongest and smartest and most adaptable survived to pass on their genes. They moved like a coordinated pack of predators who had been hunting together for years and knew exactly how to corner their prey. Captain Rachel Brooks secured the engine room with her demolition team while they planted charges that would cripple the massive ship if negotiations failed. Her movements were fluid and precise, as she worked with tools that could tear through alien metal like paper, while her team covered every approach. Sergeant Mike Johnson held the bridge approaches with a squad of Marines who had volunteered for what everyone knew would be a dangerous mission. They positioned themselves at choke points throughout the ship where their superior strength and reflexes would give them maximum advantage against the insectoid aliens. The alien crew found themselves trapped between human forces that advanced, with the inevitability of a rising tide that could not be stopped or turned back. These invaders moved without fear through a ship designed to intimidate lesser species with its size and complexity and overwhelming technological superiority. The Zephyrians finally understood what they faced when they looked into human eyes and saw something that no other galactic species possessed: These were not just soldiers fighting for territory or resources, but descendants of apex predators who had evolved on a world that killed the weak. Every human carried in their DNA the memory of ancestors who had survived ice ages and volcanic winters and mass extinctions that would have destroyed any other species. They had learned to hunt in coordinated groups and use tools and adapt to any environment, because failure meant death and death was not acceptable. The alien crew began to surrender, not because they were outgunned by superior weapons, but because they finally understood the nature of their enemy. "Please," Vextar begged as Jake Morrison stood before him in the command center of what had once been the flagship of a mighty empire. "We yield completely and surrender all claims to human territory, and promise never to threaten your species. Again, we did not understand what we were facing when we attacked your world and killed your people." Jake looked at the defeated alien commander with eyes that held no mercy for those who had brought death to innocent civilians on Earth. "You attacked our home and killed millions of our people, and ignored every warning about what happens when you provoke humanity. The old species tried to tell you, but you thought you were stronger and smarter than the accumulated wisdom of the galaxy. Now you will learn why those warnings existed, and why every civilized race knew better than to threaten the children of Earth." Reports continued to flood in from across former Zephyrian space as human forces completed their systematic dismantling of an empire that had seemed invincible. Lieutenant Kelly Brown had secured the primary research facilities where Zephyrian scientists had been developing new weapons for their planned conquest of human space. She transmitted data about alien technology to Earth Command, while her team prepared the installations for transfer to Human Control Corporal. Chris White reported that he had taken the main shipyard, where half the Zephyrian fleet had been under construction when the war began. His engineers were already studying alien designs and incorporating the best features into human vessels that would patrol the captured territories. Major Steve Garcia advanced on the Zephyrian capital world with a fleet of human ships that had been reinforced by vessels captured from the defeated empire. The planet's defense fleet had already surrendered rather than face the same fate as every other Zephyrian force that had tried to resist human advance across the galaxy. Species that had remained neutral during the brief war now scrambled to establish diplomatic relations with the victorious humans. Trading stations buzzed with conversations about the new power that had emerged from a single system to dominate an entire sector of space. The old Velthari, Merchant Ketson, shook his head sadly as he watched news reports about the complete collapse of Zephyrian resistance. "I tried to warn them," he muttered to anyone who would listen in the crowded marketplace where fear and respect for humanity mixed in equal measure. The ancient warnings were clear about what would happen if anyone was foolish enough to attack the homeworld of a Death World species. But they thought their technology made them superior to creatures they saw as primitive animals, barely worthy of notice. Now they know the truth that every wise species learns before it is too late to matter. Humans do not fight wars the way other species do, because they do not seek victory through negotiation or territorial advantage. They fight wars to eliminate threats completely and permanently, so that those threats can never rise again to endanger human lives. The Zephyrian Empire was not just defeated in battle but systematically dismantled as human forces occupied every world and space station and resource extraction facility. Their military was disbanded and their weapons were confiscated, and their leaders were taken into custody to await trial for crimes against humanity. The surviving Zephyrian population found themselves under human administration that was firm but fair, as long as they followed the new rules. Children who had been raised to believe in Zephyrian superiority now learned about other species and the importance of peaceful coexistence. Adults who had supported the war against humanity were required to perform community service on worlds damaged by Zephyrian aggression. The galaxy watched in fascination and terror as humanity demonstrated what happened when a Death World species decided that threats must be eliminated permanently. This was not conquest for profit or territory, but the methodical removal of a danger that had proven it could not be trusted to coexist peacefully. Other empires that had been planning their own expansion suddenly found themselves reconsidering those plans in light of what had happened to the Zephyrians. The humans had shown that they possessed not only the will to fight, but the ability to coordinate military action across dozens of star systems simultaneously. They had revealed a hidden network of agents and allies that spanned the known galaxy and could be activated at a moment's notice. Most importantly, they had demonstrated the truth behind the ancient warnings that wise species had been passing down for generations about the dangers of provoking humanity. 6 months after the war ended, the galaxy had completely changed as new power structures emerged from the ashes of the Zephyrian Empire that had once seemed invincible. The Zephyrian Empire no longer existed, as its territories were either liberated and returned to their original inhabitants or placed under human protection until stable governments could be established. The surviving Zephyrians found themselves relocated to a reservation world where they studied agriculture and philosophy under careful human supervision. Their weapons had been destroyed, and their warships had been converted into cargo vessels that carried supplies to worlds damaged during their years of conquest. Children who had grown up believing in Zephyrian superiority now learned about cooperation and peaceful coexistence from teachers who emphasized the value of all life. Adults who had supported the attack on Earth worked in reconstruction projects that repaired the damage their empire had caused across 17. Star Systems Fleet Admiral Jake Morrison stood before the Galactic Council in the Great Assembly Hall, where representatives from dozens of species watched him with expressions of respect, mixed with fear. The chamber that had once echoed with debates about trade agreements and territorial disputes now focused entirely on the new reality that humanity had created. "We must acknowledge that the old warnings about humanity were insufficient," said Council Speaker Mordan, whose reptilian species had survived by never provoking younger races. The ancient texts that spoke of Deathworld children and their capacity for violence did not adequately convey the true scope of human capabilities. "We must update our records and ensure that every species understands what happened to those who chose to ignore the wisdom of previous generations." Ambassador Linda Thompson represented Earth in these proceedings with dignity that impressed even species who had initially feared human intentions. "We never wanted this conflict," she said, while addressing the assembled delegates who hung on every word. "We tried to join the galactic community as peaceful neighbors who could contribute to scientific advancement and cultural exchange. But when our home was attacked and our people were killed, we responded in the only way that Earth's children know how to respond to existential threats. We eliminated the threat completely so that it could never endanger innocent lives again." The new warnings spread across the galaxy within weeks, carried by traders and diplomats and survivors who had witnessed the swift destruction of Zephyrian power. These warnings were more detailed and more urgent than the ancient texts that had tried to explain why humanity should be left alone. Humanity is not merely another species among the thousands that populate our galaxy, but something fundamentally different and far more dangerous. They are the children of a death world, where survival required capabilities that no garden world species can truly comprehend. Their planet forged them in gravity that would crush most aliens and weather that could kill the unprepared and natural disasters that wiped out entire continents. They learned to hunt in coordinated groups and use tools and adapt to any environment because those who could not master these skills simply died. When threatened, they do not retreat to negotiate or seek compromise, but multiply their efforts until the threat is completely eliminated. When attacked, they do not respond with proportional force, but with overwhelming violence that continues until victory is absolute and permanent. When their home is endangered, they become something beyond normal warfare and transform into an unstoppable force that reshapes entire sectors of space. General Paul Adams commanded human garrison forces throughout former Zephyrian territory, where he received regular reports from subordinates stationed on dozens of worlds. Every species in the local cluster was requesting diplomatic relations with Earth as they sought to avoid repeating the mistakes that had doomed the Zephyrians. Trade delegations arrived daily offering resources and technology in exchange for human protection from other aggressive species. Some civilizations that had been planning military expansion suddenly abandoned those plans and focused instead on peaceful development within their existing borders. The reputation of human military prowess had spread far beyond the worlds, directly affected by the brief war against the Zephyrian Empire species that had never heard of Earth before, now studied human history and military tactics with the dedication of scholars preparing for the most important examination of their lives. Dr. Helen Wright documented the aftermath for historical records that would be studied by future generations. Trying to understand this pivotal moment in galactic history, the universe had warned them never to provoke humanity. She wrote in reports that would become required reading in every diplomatic academy. Ancient species had passed down these warnings for generations, like sacred knowledge that must be preserved and respected. But the Zephyrians, in their arrogance, believed they were different, and stronger and more advanced than the primitive mammals who inhabited a single star system. They learned too late that humans do not fight wars to achieve political objectives or territorial gain, but to end threats permanently. The concept of proportional response does not exist in human military doctrine because threats must be eliminated completely, or they will return stronger. This is not cruelty, but survival instinct refined by millions of years of evolution on a world that killed anything weak or unprepared. Years passed and a new peace settled over the galaxy that was different from the fragile truces that had existed before humanity revealed its true nature. This was not the peace of weakness, where conflicts simmered beneath diplomatic surfaces waiting to explode into violence. Instead, it was the peace of understanding where every species now knew exactly what lived among the stars in the form of Earth's children. They were patient and creative and generous to their friends who treated them with respect and honesty. They shared technology and knowledge freely with allies who proved themselves trustworthy through actions rather than words. They protected smaller species from aggressive neighbors and mediated disputes between civilizations that might otherwise have led to devastating wars. But to their enemies, they were something entirely different and far more terrifying than any force the galaxy had previously known. They were the reason that ancient warnings had been whispered in the darkness of space stations where old traders shared stories of species that should never be provoked. They were living proof that some civilizations were too dangerous to threaten and too powerful to defeat once awakened to their full potential. The survivors of the Zephyrian War carried these lessons with them as they rebuilt their society under human guidance. Their children learned that cooperation was stronger than conquest, and that wisdom lay in respecting the warnings that elder species had preserved. The galaxy had learned to listen when those warnings were spoken because everyone now understood the consequences of ignoring them. Trade routes that had been disrupted by Zephyrian aggression reopened as merchant ships carried goods between worlds that were no longer afraid of imperial expansion. Scientific research flourished as species that had been enemies began collaborating on projects that benefited everyone. Cultural exchanges brought together civilizations that had been isolated by fear and mistrust during the years of Zephyrian dominance. And at the center of this new golden age stood humanity, watching over the peace they had created through strength that could not be questioned. They had not sought to become the galaxy's guardians, but had accepted that role when others proved they could not be trusted with power. The universe had tried to warn the Zephyrians, but they had chosen to ignore those warnings and learn the hard way why humanity inspired both respect and fear. Now everyone understood that among the stars lived the children of Earth who brought both hope and terror, depending on whether you chose to be their friend or enemy. The warnings would never be ignored again because the galaxy had finally learned to listen.